Hello, dreamer. Tonight, let me guide you into a realm of ancient magic and quiet wonder. Imagine a silver-haired princess standing on the brink of destiny, drawn into the heart of a mystical forest where secrets of the veil await. This is a story of courage, balance, and the unbreakable bond between worlds. Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and feel the calm of the night settle over you. Let the whispers of the trees and the glow of the twin moons carry you into a peaceful slumber. Rest now, and let the tale begin. The eve of her coronation was supposed to be a time of solemn preparation. Yet Elara found no solace within the grand halls of her ancestral palace. The air inside was heavy with the scents of pinewood torches and pressed flowers, suffocating in its expectation. The distant hum of revelers celebrating in the lower courts reached her ears, a faint murmur against the backdrop of her restless thoughts. She stood by the open balcony, her silver hair catching the light of the twin moons that hung low in the midnight sky. Then, faint and otherworldly, it came. A melody that did not belong to the mortal realm. It began as a whispering hum, weaving through the wind like a secret too ancient to be spoken aloud. The tune was strange, yet it stirred something deep within her, something older than memory. Elara turned her gaze to the dark line of the forest beyond the palace grounds, its shadows alive with an allure she could not name. Drawn as if by a spell, she slipped through the quiet corridors of the palace, her steps muffled by the intricate rugs of Elven craft. None of the sentinels saw her leave. Perhaps they too had been lulled by the enchantment of that melody. The cold night air greeted her as she crossed the threshold into the open world, her silk robes trailing like whispers behind her. The forest waited, vast and unknowable. She hesitated at its edge, the towering trees looming like silent sentinels. The song grew stronger now, filling the spaces between the rustling leaves. And before she could think to turn back, her feet moved of their own accord. The woods swallowed her whole. Inside the forest, the world was different. The twin moon's light barely pierced the dense canopy, and what light managed to filter through seemed to shimmer with an iridescence that was not natural. The melody guided her deeper, its source ever elusive, as though the forest itself wished to see her ensnared. She walked for what felt like hours, though the forest warped time in ways she could not comprehend. It was when she reached a small clearing that she saw him, the Deer King. He stood beneath the pale light of the moons, his form majestic and impossible. His antlers, like twisted gold, seemed to catch the moonlight and amplify it, casting a glow that illuminated the glade. His fur shimmered with the hues of dawn and dusk, and his eyes, oh, his eyes, held the weight of countless centuries. Elara's breath caught in her throat as he stepped toward her, his hooves making no sound upon the mossy earth. When he spoke, his voice was not of this world. It was the sound of rustling leaves, of ancient roots shifting beneath the soil, of winds carrying forgotten words across vast distances. Then the vision shifted. She saw hunters cloaked in dark magic, their eyes gleaming with greed as they pursued the Deer King's herd. She saw traps laced with enchantments, their cruel designs crafted to ensnare not just flesh but spirit. Her heart clenched as she watched a young fawn struggle against invisible bonds, its cries echoing in the void. The final image was of the Deer King himself, his antlers shattered, his form fading as the forest around him withered into desolation. Elara gasped, pulling back from the water. This cannot be the future. It is the future that awaits if nothing is done, the Deer King said solemnly. The hunters seek my antlers, for they believe them to be the source of the forest's magic. They do not understand that to sever them would sever the life of this place. Without the veil, the forest will die, and your people will follow. Elara rose, her mind racing. What can I do? The Deer King stepped closer, his presence both a comfort and a challenge. You must help me protect my herd. The hunter's magic grows stronger, and their allies walk among your kind. The balance must be restored, or all will be lost. She looked into his golden eyes, the weight of his words settling upon her like a mantle. The vision she had seen lingered in her mind, vivid and terrible. Though fear coursed through her veins, something deeper stirred, a resolve she had never known. I will help you, she said, her voice steady. Tell me what I must do. The Deer King inclined his head, a gesture of gratitude and trust. Then the path ahead will reveal itself. But tread carefully, for the hunters are closer than you think. As the waterfall's hum deepened, the forest around them seemed to hold its breath, as if the trees themselves were listening. Elara stood tall, her heart alight with determination, unaware of the shadows that had begun to stir in the glades behind them. The Deer King's warning echoed in Elara's thoughts as they left the shimmering veil behind. The forest, once a realm of wonder, now felt fraught with unseen dangers. The air grew colder, the light of the twin moons obscured by thick branches, woven like a canopy of shadows. Each step seemed to carry a weight, as though the forest mourned the threats encroaching upon it. As they approached the outskirts of her kingdom, Elara slowed. The grand palace loomed in the distance, its spires piercing the dark sky like a fortress of stars. By day it stood as a symbol of her people's pride, but tonight it seemed foreign, its walls suffused with a stillness that felt unnatural. You must tread carefully now, the Deer King said, his voice low. He had taken on the form of a silent stag, his antlers dimmed to avoid drawing attention. The hunter's magic is insidious, and it has found allies among your kind. The forest speaks of betrayal. Elara tightened her cloak around her shoulders, a chill spreading through her that had little to do with the night's cold. Allies! Among the council! The thought stung, but it was not entirely a surprise. The court had long been divided, with whispers of factions seeking greater power. She had dismissed such rumours before, thinking them the petty squabbles of ambitious nobles. Now she wondered how blind she had been. The palace gates were unguarded, the revelry of the coronation feast echoing faintly from within. Elara entered with measured steps, her senses attuned to every sound, every flicker of movement. The Deer King followed, his form blending seamlessly with the shadows of the grand hall. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of spiced wine and candle wax. The council chamber stood empty, its heavy oak doors slightly ajar. Elara pushed them open cautiously, her heart quickening. The room was dimly lit, its towering shelves of ancient scrolls casting long shadows across the stone floor. She had taken only a few steps inside when she heard it. A faint, murmured conversation coming from behind the council table. She pressed herself against the wall, her breath shallow as she strained to listen. The herd will scatter once the antlers are severed, a voice hissed. It was low and sharp, carrying a note of urgency. The magic will be ours, and the forest's resistance will crumble. The Deer King's strength wanes. We must act before the moons wane further. Elara's heart froze. She recognized the speaker, Lord Dainel, one of her father's most trusted advisors. His voice was followed by another, softer but no less dangerous. And what of the princess? She has wandered too close to the truth. A shadow moved across the chamber, revealing a figure cloaked in black. The man's face was hidden, but the glint of a talisman around his neck marked him as one of the hunters. His hand hovered over a map spread across the table, lines drawn in blood-red ink marking paths through the forest. Elara's pulse thundered in her ears. The conspiracy was deeper than she had imagined. The hunters were not merely intruders. They had infiltrated the highest ranks of her kingdom. A soft sound drew her attention. The Deer King had stepped silently into the room, his eyes fixed on the cloaked figure. Though he remained hidden in the shadows, Elara felt the power emanating from him, a quiet strength that filled the chamber. Before she could think to stop him, the Deer King shifted, his voice filling the air like a sudden storm. You dare conspire against the veil? The cloaked man spun, his talisman glowing with a sickly green light. Lord Dainel stumbled backward, his face pale as the Deer King stepped fully into the chamber, his antlers glimmering faintly. You are a relic, the cloaked man spat, though his voice trembled. Your time is over. The hunter raised a hand, a bolt of dark energy arcing toward the Deer King. Elara reacted instinctively, drawing the ceremonial dagger at her side. She hurled it through the air, its silver blade catching the faint light. The weapon struck the hunter's talisman, shattering it in a burst of green sparks. The hunter staggered, his magic disrupted, but the force of his spell ricocheted through the chamber. Books toppled from shelves, scrolls unfurled across the floor, and a cold wind howled through the room as though the forest itself was screaming. "Run!" the Deer King said, his voice sharp. "They will regroup." Elara hesitated for only a moment before nodding. She turned and fled, the Deer King close behind. As they disappeared into the labyrinthine corridors of the palace, the sounds of pursuit grew fainter, though the weight of the conspiracy bore heavily upon her. The shadows of the hunters now extended far beyond the forest. The battle for the veil was no longer one of magic alone. It was a battle for the soul of her people. The forest was no longer the sanctuary it had once been. Shadows clung to the trees like living things, their presence an oppressive reminder of the hunter's dark magic. Elara and the Deer King moved swiftly, guided by faint glimmers of moonlight that broke through the canopy above. The path was narrow and winding, leading to the ancient ruins of the Elder Tree, a place whispered of in legends but rarely seen by mortal eyes. Elara's heart raced as the ruins came into view, their towering stone columns twisted and weathered by time. At the center stood the Elder Tree itself, its immense trunk glowing faintly with an inner light. Its branches stretched skyward, their tips vanishing into the mist that blanketed the forest. Beneath its sprawling roots, the earth pulsed with the magic of a world older than her own. This was the boundary between realms, the heart of the veil. The Deer King paused at the edge of the clearing, his golden eyes scanning the surroundings. "This is where it must end," he said, his voice heavy with resolve. "The hunters will come, drawn by the power of the Elder Tree. They will not stop until either the veil is destroyed or their greed consumes them." Elara stepped closer to the tree, its presence both humbling and overwhelming. "And what of us?" she asked. "How do we stand against a force so steeped in darkness?" The Deer King turned to her, his antlers catching the faint glow of the tree. "The forest has chosen you, Elara. The magic of the veil flows through your blood now, awakened by the waterfall's touch. But to wield it, you must face the trial." Elara felt a chill run through her. "What trial?" The Deer King lowered his head, his voice solemn. "The Elder Tree will test your resolve. It will strip away the illusions you hold about yourself, leaving you bare before its judgment. If you falter, the power will consume you. If you succeed, the forest will stand with you." The weight of his words settled over her, but there was no time for hesitation. She nodded, stepping into the clearing. As she approached the tree, the air around her grew thick, charged with an energy that seemed to hum with awareness. The world blurred at the edges, and the forest fell silent, as though holding its breath. When she touched the bark of the Elder Tree, a blinding light engulfed her. The ground beneath her feet disappeared, replaced by a vast, endless void. She stood alone, the stillness oppressive. Then, the void began to shift, forming visions that surrounded her like spectres. The first vision was of her father, his face lined with disappointment as he looked upon her. "You are too soft, Elara," he said, his voice echoing. "You are not ready to lead. You lack the strength to bear the crown." The words stung, but Elara stood firm. "Strength is not measured by the hardness of one's heart," she said, her voice steady. "It is measured by the courage to protect what is precious." The vision dissolved, replaced by another. Her people, their faces etched with fear as the forest withered around them. They reached out to her, their cries piercing the silence. "You cannot save us," they whispered. "The hunter's power is too great." Elara closed her eyes, her resolve hardening. "I cannot promise victory, but I will not abandon you. The forest will fight with me, and together we will endure." The final vision emerged, a shadowy figure with golden antlers, its form twisted and broken. It stood before her, its gaze accusing. "You will fail, as all before you have failed. The forest will fall, and the veil will shatter." Elara's heart clenched, but she stepped forward, her voice rising with defiance. "The forest has not fallen yet. Its magic endures because we fight for it. I will not falter." The figure lunged at her, but before it could strike, the void shattered like glass. Elara gasped, finding herself back in the clearing, her hand still pressed against the elder tree. Its glow had grown brighter, its light enveloping her in a warmth that felt like an embrace. The Deer King stood nearby, his golden eyes reflecting pride. "You have passed the trial," he said. "The forest has accepted you as its guardian." Before Elara could respond, a thunderous sound shook the ground. The hunters had arrived, their dark magic rippling through the air. The clearing filled with their shadowy forms, their eyes gleaming with malevolence. Elara turned to the Deer King, her newfound power surging within her. "Then let us show them the strength of the forest." Together, they stood before the elder tree, its roots awakening to defend the veil. The hunter's spells clashed with the magic of the forest, the battle beginning beneath the ancient branches of the tree that held the fate of their world. The clearing erupted into chaos, a cacophony of dark magic and the forest's awakening might. The hunters surged forward, their talismans glowing with malevolent energy that twisted the air around them. Shadows poured from their hands, coiling and snapping like living things, hungry to devour the light of the elder tree. Elara stood firm beside the Deer King, her pulse steady despite the storm around her. The magic of the veil pulsed through her veins, a steady rhythm that guided her movements. She raised her hands, feeling the energy of the forest respond. Vines burst from the earth, weaving together to form a barrier that deflected the hunters' attacks. The ground beneath them trembled, as though the forest itself had come alive to defend its heart. The hunter's leader stepped forward, his talisman flaring with an unnatural light. His eyes, dark and sharp as obsidian, locked onto Elara. "You think the forest will save you, girl?" he sneered. "Its time is over. Its power belongs to us now." The words barely left his mouth before the Deer King charged, his antlers gleaming with golden light. The impact threw the hunter backward, his spell breaking apart in a cascade of sparks. The Deer King turned, his voice resonating like thunder. "You trespass on sacred ground. Leave now, or be consumed by the forest's wrath." But the hunters did not retreat. Instead, they unleashed a torrent of dark magic, their shadows spreading like a blight across the clearing. The elder tree groaned, its light dimming as the hunter's power encroached. Elara felt the weight of the battle pressing down on her. The veil's magic burned within her, urging her to act. Closing her eyes, she reached out with her mind, connecting to the ancient energy that flowed through the tree and the land around it. She felt the forest respond, its essence intertwining with hers, lending her its strength. When she opened her eyes, they glowed with a light that mirrored the elder trees. Raising her arms, she spoke words that were not her own, an incantation carried by the wind. The vines around her grew thicker, their thorns gleaming like daggers, while roots erupted from the ground to entangle the hunters. The air filled with the sound of the forest's fury, branches creaking, leaves rustling, the very earth shifting beneath their feet. The hunters struggled, their dark magic faltering against the forest's onslaught. But the leader, undeterred, raised his talisman high, summoning a spell that darkened the sky above them. The air grew heavy, the light of the moons extinguished by an unnatural eclipse. "Elara!" the Deer King called, his voice urgent. "The talisman! Destroy it, or all will be lost." Elara focused her gaze on the hunter, the source of the darkness that threatened to consume them. The forest's energy surged within her, guiding her steps as she advanced. The hunter turned, his expression twisting into one of rage and desperation. "You dare challenge me!" he roared, unleashing a blast of shadowy energy. Elara raised her hand, the magic of the veil forming a shield around her. The spell shattered against it, sending shards of light scattering through the air. With a swift motion, she called upon the forest once more, a stream of golden vines shooting toward the talisman. They coiled around it, their thorns sinking deep, and with a final burst of energy, the talisman shattered, its dark power dissipating into the night. The eclipse lifted, the light of the moons returning to the clearing. The hunters froze, their magic unraveling as the veil's energy surged back into balance. The Deer King stepped forward, his presence commanding, and with a single powerful roar, the hunters fled, their shadows melting into the forest. Silence fell over the clearing, broken only by the soft rustle of leaves. Elara sank to her knees, the weight of the magic leaving her breathless. The Deer King approached, lowering his great head until his golden eyes met hers. "You have done what no one else could," he said, his voice filled with quiet reverence. "The forest owes you its life, and I owe you my gratitude." Elara looked up at the elder tree, its light brighter than ever before. "The veil is safe," she murmured, a faint smile on her lips. "But the bond between our people must be restored. This cannot happen again." The Deer King nodded. "The pact shall be renewed, as it was in the beginning. The forest and your kind will protect one another as it was always meant to be." As dawn broke over the forest, Elara and the Deer King stood beneath the elder tree, their forms bathed in its radiant glow. The magic of the veil flowed freely once more, a promise of harmony between realms. When Elara returned to her kingdom, she carried with her not only the power of the forest, but also the knowledge that true strength came from unity and purpose. And though the Deer King vanished into the shadows of the forest, his presence lingered, a reminder of the bond forged beneath the ancient branches of the elder tree, a bond that would endure for generations to come.